Four astronauts work on a near-Earth space station. One day they try to escape from a possible collision with space debris. The ship's commander, Vincent, returns from space when communications engineer Justin tries to detect an incomprehensible problem that prevents the station from turning away from the collision. Assistant Jonathan announces that there are 6 minutes left before the accident and suggests thinking about evacuation. But then Justin reports that she has found a breakdown, and Dr. Andre asks the command post for additional coordinates. Having received them, Jonathan turns the station away from the debris, letting it pass by. Everyone is happy that the 500th day in space has ended well, and there is exactly the same amount of time left until the end of the expedition. On the day of their departure, the President of Quebec says with pride that it was they who launched a new scientific and psychological project in which 4 astronauts will have to spend 1,000 days on the space station. The expedition will be commanded by Vincent Kaler, the second man to set foot on Mars. During a serious global crisis, when there is a shortage of minerals, many scientists turn their attention to the stars. Quebec is one of the few countries that export water, which causes discontent among others. Therefore, it was decided to find water in space. At the same time, one of the scientists began collaborating with an American private company and turned his attention to Jupiter's moon Europa. There, under a thick crust of ice, there may be water and even life. That's why they sent a space probe there, after which people will fly to Europa. And then Quebec, in order to prepare the crew for an ultra-long flight, decides to conduct a 3-year internship for candidates at the orbital station. The passengers began to get to know each other long before the flight. People spent a lot of time together. Jonathan's job is to receive signals from the probe and process them. He is inspired by the idea that his work can change the whole world. Justine is responsible for the operation of all electronics on the station. Andrea controls all scientific experiments and is in touch with the control center. In addition, she monitors the physical and mental health of the crew. Captain Vincent is responsible for all preparations for the flight to Europa, who is well aware of the complexity and responsibility of their task. The crew is well prepared and able to solve any technical problems. And now the 900th day of the flight is approaching. Jonathan relaxes and remembers how he visited his mother's grave. But the probe's signal sounds and he goes to the workplace, where he soon calls the others. Fresh water has been discovered on Europa. After some time, this news flies around the entire Earth, and the inorganic water reserves found are the greatest discovery made by the Quebec probe. Before that, it was believed that the water on Jupiter's satellite would be salty. Therefore, the president awards everyone involved with orders. While the news is being celebrated on Earth, the astronauts open the champagne. Justine asks Vincent to tell him what it was like on Mars, and he recalls his experience. The main shock was returning to Earth, because seeing everyone walking around the city became something new, and this awaits them all. Later, everyone gathers in the wheelhouses and looks at Jupiter, where they will someday end up. Suddenly, a signal comes about the approach of a solar vortex. This is a powerful burst of radioactivity of the electromagnetic spectrum, and although it is dangerous for the station, the astronauts are completely isolated in their cabins. But today, Jonathan and Justine chose to spend this isolation together. Andrea rereads her lover's letters when the signal sounds about another protocol. She meets Vincent in the corridor, but the others are late. The woman goes to the lab, and the commander sees Justine leaving Jonathan's cabin and understands everything. He starts to grumble at them, but Jonathan reminds them that everyone was drinking. At this moment, an excited Andrea calls them. The astronauts rush to the kitchen, where Montreal is seen engulfed in explosions on the monitor. The announcer says that in the morning there were explosions in the subway, where at that time there were many students and workers. The president promises to find and punish those guilty of this crime and asks to show sympathy to the families of the victims. Later, the crew is informed that their families were not harmed, with the exception of Vincent. His son is injured and is now in the clinic. There are rumors that this happened precisely because of their discovery, so communication with the crew is temporarily limited. But the astronauts cannot abandon what they started, because this is the hope of humanity. Vincent tells the others that in 1,000 days they will be replaced by another crew. However, their colleague and backup Xavier passed away. Hearing about this, Andrea runs away from the wardroom. She cries, remembering how happy she was to have entered the project, and Xavier supported her. Later, Vincent calls his son. He says that he got his hands injured and is now worried about whether he will be able to play basketball. At this time, Jonathan teaches Justine to play the piano and notes that the girl is getting better at it. Suddenly, all communication is lost, and the girl goes to check it. But then Jonathan calls the crew to the observation window, and people see how explosions are blooming all over the planet. They try to contact the Mission Control Center, but there is no connection. Vincent orders to send messages on all frequencies, but but no one answers anywhere. The woman understands that nuclear explosions occurred at the site of all major cities, including Montreal. At this moment, the German space station answers them, but they also do not know anything, and they also have no connection with anyone. Vincent orders to maintain silence on the air. Jonathan suggests evacuating, but Vincent does not understand where, and he reminds them of the priority to carry out the center's order, although it may no longer exist. Andrea reminds them of their families, but the astronauts can't help them. 6 days pass. They look at the dark Earth, where there is not a single light. Vincent tries to contact at least someone from time to time, but all in vain. He asks Andre to check their psychological state, but the woman refuses because she is in shock. But she can listen to him. He admits that after the flight to Mars, he felt offended because he was second. And when the opportunity arose to become first somewhere, everything failed. And his son is also lost, which is much more terrible for him. And now he doesn't even know why he wanted to become an astronaut. And this feeling begins to overwhelm everyone else. The 1000th day comes. Today they were supposed to return home to prepare for the flight to Europe. Suddenly an alarm sounds on the station, after which the AI reports that the escape pod is ready to fly in 2 minutes. Everyone runs there, and it turns out that Vincent climbed into it and wants to escape from the station. Jonathan opens the door and pulls the captain out, while Andrea closes the hatch, but she can no longer stop the departure, and the capsule flies away, leaving the crew without the possibility of evacuation. Vincent behaves inappropriately, and Andrea has to give him an injection of a sedative, but the other 3 remain in despair, not knowing what they will do. According to protocol, Andrea must declare Vincent incapable of performing the duties of commander and appoint herself as the main one. Later, Vincent says that he had a nervous breakdown, and he does not even remember how he got into the capsule. He just wanted to see his son. Jonathan accuses him of selfishness and cowardice. A quarrel arises, but Andrea stops it. They will not be able to return to Earth and cannot expect help. She calculated the remaining supplies and they will last another 25 days. And during this time, they need to think of something. Now Justine starts to get hysterical because even if they return to Earth, there is nothing more to do there. She remembers her friend who was unhappy that she agreed to the flight. Then she was sure that she wanted to fly, and one day the woman goes into outer space. Jonathan watches for a long time as her figure disappears into the void, and Andrea tries to console him. But when Vincent tries to express sympathy, Jonathan hits him. An hour later, signals came from the Russian orbital station. The only surviving cosmonaut asks for help, for which he is ready to dock at the rescue station with their ship. When the man arrives, Andre is immediately seen to be exhausted and suffering from the radiation he received. They can hardly help him. Vincent points out that the Russian capsule is designed for 3, and now there are 4 of them. They can't stay here any longer either. Their oxygen supplies are running out. Therefore, Jonathan is offered to wait for the cosmonaut's destruction and return to Earth in his capsule. But the woman is not yet ready to make such a decision, especially since the Russian is starting to come to his senses. He says that their station had problems with reflectors during a solar vortex, and the rest of the crew were destroyed. At this time, the man is counting on the possibility of returning them all in the capsule and is convinced that this is impossible. He remembers Justin reproaching himself for his callousness. Meanwhile, the guest admits that he knows about his illness and that he has no hope, and tells that the greatest battle of all time has occurred on Earth, and it happened because of their discovery. Vincent is amazed that all this is really because of water, but the guest laughs, urging him not to make a fool of him. He knows that water was the official pretext. Jonathan, including the data received from Europe, begins to examine them carefully, and suddenly everyone sees something they hadn't noticed before. An unknown object is clearly visible on Europa, similar to a huge spaceship. People are studying it, not understanding why no one told them anything. Below, all this was presented as a battle for water. Vincent believes that people should know the truth, and this ship can change the entire worldview and all data on the structure of the universe. And this concerns all of humanity. He wants to know who built it and where it came from. Later, the guest thanks Andre for his help, although he knows that he has no hope. The woman cannot say how much time he has left, although Vincent insists on an urgent departure. And Jonathan remembers his father, who wrote him a farewell letter. Later, the crew discusses the plan. Jonathan calculates the landing vectors. The guest suggests using the Soviet space station, but it is old and cannot land without help from Earth. Understanding his doubts, Andrea says that he will fly home in any case. And then Vincent volunteers to stay at the station because it was his fault that the capsule was lost. On the 1026th day, the people are preparing for departure. The former captain writes a letter to his son and asks Jonathan to find him if he is still alive. He promises that he will do so. They say goodbye. Jonathan remembers the letter from his father, which he did not want to read because he thought that his father blamed him for his mother's death, and opens it. Later, he comes out to the team and says that he will not fly. He will transmit all the data about the discovery on Europe through all channels, hoping that people will learn the truth, and asks Vincent to pass the letter to his father. Andrea promises to send help as soon as possible. The three put on spacesuits and enter the capsule. Jonathan stays at the station and starts sending messages with the truth about their discovery, and then mentally says goodbye to his father, who never considered him guilty and was very proud of his son astronaut.